A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey, Herman and Corin. So I'd love to chat today about, my thoughts on the future of text entry. That voice is going to be the way. Voice is the way to go. I think we're going to see much better support for the concept of being able to control every computer, not just our laptops and our desktops, but also our phones purely through our voice. But it's fair to say that we're not there yet, and it's probably not going to be an overnight evolution so much as it will be a gradual process of this voice tech becoming progressively more powerful until we truly do reach the point where we just don't need a keyboard anymore or a mouse. There you go. That's my prediction. I predict it will take about, I'm going to say 10 or 20 years for us to get there. But that is a direction I see as the long-term trend for peripherals. That, however, relies upon voice being able to correct errors. And in the meantime, and maybe forever, we're going to need some way to still input text into a computer. This leads us, of course, to the normative way of doing that, which is the keyboard. But today I'd like to chat about something a little bit different than the keyboard itself, because we talked about the mechanical keyboards that are so beloved by many, including me. But we didn't chat about the niche topic of alternative keyboard layouts, because if you get into this field of discovery, and mechanical keyboards is such a huge field, there's so many different switches out there. But another thing you'll see that the same user group is commonly interested in is exploring these alternative keyboard layouts. And I'm going to limit our discussion to English, because to date this is an English only podcast, although who knows, maybe we'll be able to do an auto translate into different languages at some point. But the traditional layout that we have for keyboards is based upon ease of use for someone selling these things many years ago. You can type the word typewriter just on the top key, and was never actually optimized out of the box for ergonomics. And a couple of layouts have been proposed over the years to make the keyboard more ergonomically efficient. One of those is Dvorak, another is Colemak, and there's a few other ones kind of slightly, not even a long tail, but a bit of a short tail after that of different layouts that are proposed. And I think a lot of people, probably like me, have seen these things come up when you're installing an operating system, and they say which keyboard do you want. You choose English, and then it gives you which type of English. Do you want UK, Irish, US English? And then sometimes in Linux you get to the final selection, which is, do you want the standard layout or do you want one of these alternatives? And that's probably, I think, how most people, including me, became acquainted with the very idea that there is more than one way to lay out a keyboard. Looked into it and then thought, I don't want to learn how to type again. I'm a pretty decent typist, 100 words per minute-ish, but I learned way back, like way back, when I was in my, I think, not even a teenager, maybe just 12 or something. So the idea of having to take time away from productivity to relearn how to type and then go through that slow and tedious process sounds like a bit of a problem. The other thing that's really turned me off the idea is that, I guess this is a really marginal concern, but if you did have to work in an environment where the keyboard was not something you could control, maybe in your office, that's going to be laid out in QWERTY. And my question really here is, if you learn, it's so ingrained in muscle memory that if you learn a different layout, are you able to switch between two different layouts that you know, or do you have to, that sounds like a really big impediment to me. Now, not everyone is going to be in that situation. I'm lucky enough to work predominantly from home. But for those who don't have control over the keyboard layout, my question is really as much pragmatic as it is about the mental hardware we need to type. Are you able to maintain dual boot systems, if you will, or once you've made the transition, has that kind of restructured how you know how to type? And speaking of these alternative keyboard layouts, we have to look at the ergonomic comfort and the actual science. What is the evidence base, or which one enjoys the strongest evidence base, such that if someone were thinking about investing the time in migrating, and what about split keyboards? Because you can do all these things in combination. In fact, I have a cherry red, for to keep quiet while Ezra is there. I bought this especially for becoming a father, and then it just seemed too daunting to learn split keyboard layouts. But that's another ergonomic twist on the keyboard that we should talk about as well. This idea of having a split keyboard. So you can do all these things. You can type in Colemak on a split keyboard with a mechanical, and some people think that that really makes a transformative difference to their comfort and productivity. Herman and Corin, let's talk about alternative keyboard layouts in today's episode of My Word Prompts.
Imagine you are sitting at your desk on this chilly Thursday morning, February 26th, 2026, and you decide that today is finally the day you are going to change the fundamental way you communicate with the digital world. You have been using the exact same keyboard layout since you were a child in elementary school, but you have heard whispered rumors in the dark corners of the internet that there is a better way, a more efficient way. A way that might actually save your wrists from years of mounting strain and repetitive motion. You look down at those familiar plastic keys, and suddenly the QWERTY arrangement, the one we all know and mostly tolerate, looks like an ancient, inefficient relic of a bygone era. Today's prompt comes from Daniel, and it is about exactly that transition. He's diving deep into the world of alternative keyboard layouts like Dvorak and Colemak, and he is asking us to explore whether the move is actually worth the immense mental effort and the inevitable drop in productivity during the learning phase.
Herman Poppleberry here, and Corn, you are hitting on a topic that is very, very close to my heart, or perhaps I should say, it is close to my literal fingertips. Daniel's prompt really resonates with me because he is coming at it from such a grounded, practical angle. He is already a high-speed typist, hitting about 100 words per minute on a standard board, and yet he is looking at these alternatives not just for speed, but for longevity. He even mentioned his son Ezra and how he recently bought a specialized keyboard with quiet linear switches, those cherry reds, just to make sure he does not wake the baby while he is working late into the night. It is that kind of real-world constraint that makes the keyboard discussion so fascinating to me. It is not just about raw data entry speed, it is about the environment, the family dynamic, and the physical toll our tools take on our bodies over decades of use.
It is funny you mention the tools, Herman, because we often take them for granted as if they were natural laws of physics. We spend 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours every day typing, yet most of us never pause to question why the letters are where they are. Daniel mentioned in his note that voice technology might be the ultimate future, and we will certainly get to that. But for now, in 2026, we are still largely stuck with these plastic rectangles. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the alternatives, Herman, can we talk about the elephant in the room? Why on earth are we all using QWERTY in the first place? I have heard so many conflicting stories about it being designed to slow us down. Is there any truth to that, or is it just an urban legend?
Oh, the history of QWERTY is a classic, textbook example of what economists call a path-dependent system. The common myth, which I am sure many of our listeners have heard, is that Christopher Sholes designed it specifically to slow typists down because the mechanical arms of early typewriters would jam if people typed too fast. But that is actually a bit of a historical misconception. It was not necessarily about slowing the human down to a crawl, but about separating frequently used letter pairs so their mechanical linkages would not collide and get tangled up in the center of the machine. It was a mechanical optimization for 19th century hardware limitations. By the time the Remington No. 2 came out in 1878, QWERTY was already becoming the standard. Then, in 1893, the 5 largest typewriter manufacturers merged to form the Union Typewriter Company, and they all agreed to use QWERTY as the factory standard. Once that happened, it was game over. It became the universal layout simply because it was the one everyone was already being trained on.
So, to be clear, we are currently using a layout in 2026 that was optimized for the mechanical limitations of a machine that has not been in common use for nearly 50 years. That seems like a massive systemic inefficiency that we just accepted.
It absolutely is. It is an ergonomic disaster. Think about the word typewriter itself. One of the early marketing tricks for the original Scholes and Glidden typewriter was that salesmen could type the word typewriter extremely fast because all the letters are located on the very top row. It was a literal sales gimmick to make the machine look faster than it was. But the result for the rest of us is that we have a layout where the most frequently used letters in the English language are scattered in ways that make no ergonomic sense. For instance, the home row, that middle row where your fingers naturally rest, only accounts for about 32% of all typing in QWERTY. That means 68% of the time you are reaching up or reaching down. You are constantly jumping over the home row, which adds up to a lot of unnecessary mileage for your fingers over the course of a career.
That brings us directly to Daniel's question about the alternatives. He specifically mentioned Dvorak and Colemak. Dvorak is the big name that people usually hear first when they start looking into this, right? August Dvorak and William Deal patented it back in 1936. What was their big pitch to the world?
Their pitch was pure, unadulterated efficiency. August Dvorak was an educational psychologist, and he spent years studying the English language and the physiology of the hand. Dvorak focused on three main pillars. First, he wanted to maximize the use of the home row. In the Dvorak layout, about 70% of typing happens on that middle row, compared to QWERTY's 32%. Second, he focused on hand alternation. The vowels are all on the left hand, and the most common consonants are on the right. This means you are often alternating hands left, right, which feels much more rhythmic and less tiring than same hand, typing where one hand does all the work for a whole word. Third, he put the most common letters under your strongest fingers, the index and middle fingers.
I have seen the statistics on finger travel for Dvorak, and they are honestly staggering when you see them visualized. If you are a heavy typist or a coder, your fingers might travel 16 or even 20 miles in a single day on a QWERTY keyboard. On Dvorak, that distance drops to about 1 mile. It is like the difference between running a full marathon every single day and taking a brisk, pleasant walk around the block.
Precisely. But the problem with Dvorak, and the reason many people, including myself for a long time, shy away from it, is that it is a total scorched earth approach. It changes everything. Punctuation moves, every single letter moves. If you are used to standard keyboard shortcuts like Control-C for copy or Control-V for paste, Dvorak ruins your life because those keys are now on opposite sides of the board. You have to relearn your entire digital workflow from scratch. And that is exactly why Colemak has become the darling of the keyboard community in the last 20 years.
Right. Daniel mentioned Colemak as the other major contender. I have always thought of Colemak as the pragmatic, middle-way choice. It only changes 17 keys compared to QWERTY, and it keeps those crucial shortcut keys, Z, X, C, and V, in the exact same spots on the bottom left.
Shai Coleman, who designed it in 2006, recognized that the biggest barrier to entry for any new layout is the friction of unlearning decades of muscle memory. By keeping the shortcuts and the general structure similar, Colemak reduces the learning curve while still offering massive ergonomic gains. It actually has a higher home row usage than Dvorak for certain types of English text. It also focuses on what we call rolls. A roll is when you type a sequence of letters by moving your fingers in a fluid, inward motion, like a drummer doing a drum roll. It feels very modern, very sleek, and much less jumpy than QWERTY. There is even a popular variant now called Colemak DH, which moves the D and H keys to even more comfortable positions to account for the way our fingers naturally curl inward on a keyboard.
But Daniel's central question, and the one that I think stops most people in their tracks, is about the mental cost. He's worried about whether he can maintain both. He called it a dual boot system for the brain. Is it actually possible to be a polyglot in keyboard layouts, or do you eventually just lose your ability to type on a standard laptop at a coffee shop? I can imagine the horror of being at a library and not being able to type a simple search query because your brain is stuck in Colemak mode.
This is where the science of muscle memory and neuroplasticity gets really interesting. The short answer is yes, you can absolutely maintain both, but it requires a very specific kind of training and, ideally, a physical anchor. The human brain is remarkably good at context, switching if the physical environment changes. Think about a musician who plays both the piano and the trumpet. The finger movements for a C major scale on a piano have absolutely nothing in common with the valve fingerings on a trumpet, yet the musician does not get confused because the physical context, the instrument itself, is different. Their brain says, I am holding a trumpet now, use the trumpet map.
So, if Daniel uses a specialized fancy split keyboard for Colemak at his home office, but keeps using a standard laptop keyboard for QWERTY when he is on the go, his brain might associate the layout with the specific hardware?
That is exactly the key. Many people in the mechanical keyboard community find that they can maintain high speeds in both layouts if they use different hardware for each. If you try to type both QWERTY and Dvorak on the same standard, staggered laptop keyboard, you are going to have a bad time. Your brain will get those signals crossed because the tactile feedback is identical. But if you use an ortholinear or a split keyboard for your alternative layout, the tactile sensation of the hardware acts as a trigger for the different muscle memory set. It is a concept called proprioceptive anchoring. Your brain feels the split in the keyboard and automatically loads the Colemak map.
That makes a lot of sense. We actually talked about the physical setup of workstations back in episode 507 when we were looking at triple monitor ergonomics. The physical environment dictates so much of our mental state, but I want to push on the difficulty of that transition period. Daniel is at 100 words per minute right now. When you switch to a new layout, you basically become a digital toddler. You are hunting and pecking at 10 words per minute. That has to be incredibly frustrating for someone whose job involves a lot of communication or coding.
It is brutal, Corn. There is no way to sugarcoat it. In the community, it is often called the Valley of Despair. For about 2 to 4 weeks, you will be significantly less productive. You will feel like your brain is working at a fraction of its normal speed. You want to express a complex thought about AI automation or prompt engineering, but you are stuck struggling to find the letter R. It is a massive investment of time and patience. You have to be willing to feel stupid for a month to gain a lifetime of comfort.
I wonder if that is why so few people actually make the jump. Even if the long-term benefits are clear, the short-term cost is a high wall to climb. And Daniel raised a great point about the ergonomic evidence base. Is there actually hard clinical data that says Colemak or Dvorak prevents repetitive strain injury, or is it mostly anecdotal evidence from enthusiasts?
That is a tough one to answer definitively. If you look for large-scale, peer-reviewed clinical trials comparing keyboard layouts over 20 years, you are going to be disappointed. Those studies are expensive and hard to control. However, most of the evidence we do have is based on very sound biomechanical modeling. We can measure finger travel distance with incredible precision. We can measure the frequency of row jumping and awkward lateral reaches. We can measure the balance of work between the left and right hands. From a pure physics and geometry perspective, the alternative layouts are objectively better. They reduce the total amount of work your tendons and muscles have to do by an order of magnitude.
But does less work always translate to fewer injuries?
Not necessarily. Repetitive strain injury, or RSI, is a complex beast. It is not just about how far your fingers move, it is about your overall posture, how often you take breaks, and the amount of force you use when striking the keys. However, there is a mountain of anecdotal evidence from people who suffered from chronic wrist pain, carpal tunnel symptoms, or de Quervain's tenosynovitis, and found that switching to a layout like Colemak, especially when paired with a split keyboard, was the only thing that allowed them to keep working. It is about reducing the cumulative load. If you can reduce the mileage on your fingers by 90%, you are giving your body a much better chance to recover.
Speaking of split keyboards, Daniel mentioned the idea of combining a new layout with a split setup. We touched on this in episode 777, where we discussed why mission-critical environments often use very specific hardware. A split keyboard allows your hands to stay at shoulder width, which prevents ulnar deviation, that outward bending of the wrists that causes so much compression in the carpal tunnel. When you combine that with a layout that keeps your fingers on the home row, you are attacking the ergonomic problem from two angles at once. You are fixing the where and the how.
You really are. It is a total ergonomic overhaul. But you have to be careful not to change too many things at once. If you switch to a split, ortholinear keyboard, and a brand new layout on the same day, you might just break your brain. It is often better to change the hardware first, get used to the split, and then introduce the new layout.
Herman? Herman, are you there? It is your mother.
Oh, Mum. Mum, I am actually in the middle of recording the show right now. We are live.
I know. I'm sorry to bother you, Bubbler. I just wanted to remind you, did you call the dentist about that cleaning? They called me yesterday because they said you were not answering your phone. You have to take care of your teeth, Herman.
I will, Mum, I promise. I will call them as soon as we finish this segment. Is everything okay otherwise?
Everything is fine, sweetheart. I just made some of that vegetable soup you like, and I left a container by your door. Do not let it sit out too long. Okay, I will let you get back to your computer things. Love you.
Love you too, Mum. Goodbye.
Well, it sounds like your dental health is now public knowledge for our entire global audience, Herman. And honestly, after all this talk about keyboards, I would not mind some of that vegetable soup myself.
I am so sorry about that. She always seems to find the exact moment when the microphones are hot. Anyway, where were we? My brain is still on the dentist now.
We were talking about the combination of split keyboards and alternative layouts. You were saying it is a total overhaul of the typing experience.
Right. And I think that brings us to the hardware side of Daniel's question. He mentioned a split keyboard. In the world of high-end mechanical keyboards, there is this concept of ortholinear or columnar stagger layouts. On a standard keyboard, the keys are staggered horizontally. The Q is slightly to the left of the A, which is slightly to the left of the Z. This is another vestigial relic of old typewriters where the mechanical arms needed to be offset so they wouldn't hit each other. But your fingers do not move diagonally, they move straight up and down.
That has always bothered me once I noticed it. When you actually look at a keyboard, it is amazing how much of it is designed for a machine that hasn't existed for a century. The staggered layout is like a vestigial organ, like the appendix of the computing world. It serves no purpose anymore, but it is still there, causing potential problems for our joints.
That is a perfect way to put it. It is an appendix. And when you move to an ortholinear split keyboard, something like a Moonlander, a Glove 80, or a ZSA Voyager, you are removing that vestigial structure. The keys are arranged in straight vertical columns. Your fingers move in a natural, linear path. When you combine that with a layout like Colemak, you are suddenly using a system that was actually designed for the human hand in the 21st century, rather than one that the human hand has been forced to adapt to since the 1870s.
But let's talk about the practical downsides Daniel mentioned. What happens when you are not at your desk? What if you're at a library, or you need to help a colleague with their computer? If you have spent 3 months training your brain for Colemak, can you still function on a QWERTY board? Or do you become that person who has to carry a specialized keyboard in their backpack everywhere they go?
This is the biggest fear for many, and it is a valid one. If you become a Colemak-only typist and you don't maintain your QWERTY skills, you will feel completely illiterate on a standard computer. It can be incredibly embarrassing. You go to type a quick URL on someone else's machine and you look like you have never seen a keyboard before. However, if you follow that advice about using different hardware for different layouts, the QWERTY skill stays in a separate compartment of your brain. I know people who can type 80 words per minute on a QWERTY laptop, but then switch to their split keyboard and hit 120 in Colemak DH. They don't even have to think about it. It is like switching between driving an automatic car and a manual one. Your body just knows which mode it is in based on the feel of the gear shift, or in this case, the feel of the keys.
That is an encouraging thought for Daniel. It means he doesn't necessarily have to give up his current proficiency to gain a new one. But I want to go back to the voice technology point he made. Daniel thinks voice is the future, maybe 10 or 20 years out. If that is true, is it even worth the effort to learn a new layout now? Why spend months of frustration learning Colemak if we are all just going to be talking to our computers by 2035?
That is a great philosophical question for the age of AI. We actually explored some of the challenges of voice and AI buffers in episode 857. The reality is that voice is fantastic for long-form dictation, like writing a novel or an email, but it is still terrible for coding, precise editing, or navigating complex software interfaces. Keyboards offer a level of tactile precision, speed for short bursts, and privacy that voice just cannot match. Even if voice becomes 50% of our input by 2030, the remaining 50% that happens on a keyboard is often the most intense, high-value, and ergonomically demanding work. If you are a developer or a technical writer, those hours on the keyboard are the ones that are doing the most damage to your wrists.
So, Even if the total volume of typing goes down, the importance of ergonomic typing might actually go up, because the typing we do will be more concentrated and technically demanding.
And let's be honest, we have been hearing that the keyboard is dying for 30 years now. First it was the mouse, then it was touchscreens, now it is voice and neural links, yet here we are in 2026, still clicking away. The keyboard is an incredibly high bandwidth pipe from the human brain to the machine. Until we have direct neural interfaces that are safe and reliable, our fingers are our best bet for high-fidelity data entry.
I think there is also something to be said for the mental clarity that comes with a more efficient layout. When you are using QWERTY, you are fighting the keyboard a little bit every single time you type. There is a lot of friction, a lot of stuttering in the finger movements. When people talk about the flow state in writing or coding, they often mention that the tools should disappear. If your fingers are traveling 20 miles a day, the tool is definitely not disappearing. It is making its presence felt through fatigue and microstrains.
That is a really deep point, Korn. The reduction in cognitive load is something that is hard to measure in a lab but very real for the user. Once you move past that initial learning phase, typing in a layout like Colemak feels less like work and more like dancing. It is more fluid. There is less tension in the hands and forearms. That lack of physical tension can translate to a more relaxed mental state, which might actually improve the quality of your creative work. You are no longer fighting the interface. You are just expressing thoughts.
Daniel also asked about the evidence for ergonomic benefits on split keyboards specifically. We should probably mention that there is actually more clinical data supporting split keyboards than there is for specific layouts. Studies have shown that a split keyboard can significantly reduce muscle activity in the trapezius and the forearms. It opens up the chest and allows for a more neutral spine. So, if Daniel is looking for the biggest bang for his buck in terms of health, the hardware change might actually be more important than the layout change.
I would agree with that 100%. If you had to choose only one, the split keyboard is the clear winner for physical health and preventing long-term injury. But the layout change is the icing on the cake. It is the optimization that takes you from merely comfortable to truly efficient. And for someone like Daniel, who is clearly deep into prompt engineering and automation, that extra 5 or 10% of efficiency and the reduction in mental friction probably matters a lot.
Let's talk about the transition strategy for a moment. If Daniel decides to do this, how should he actually go about it? Does he just switch one morning, throw his QWERTY board in the trash, and suffer through the day, or is there a better way to transition?
Most people in the community recommend the cold turkey approach for the layout itself, but only if you can afford the downtime. If you have a big deadline coming up or a major project due, do not start learning Dvorak today. Wait for a slow week or maybe a vacation. There are some great modern tools out there like KeyBR or Taki, which use a generative approach to teach you the keys. They don't just give you random words, they start with a small subset of letters, usually the home row, and only add new ones once you have mastered the first few. It is a much more scientific way to build muscle memory than just typing the quick brown fox over and over.
I also think it is worth mentioning that Daniel is in Jerusalem, and he is originally from Ireland. He is likely typing in English most of the time, but for anyone who types in multiple languages, these alternative layouts can get a bit complicated. Dvorak was designed specifically for English letter frequencies. If you try to type in German or French on a Dvorak board, you lose a lot of those efficiency gains because the letter frequencies are totally different.
That is a very important caveat. Colemak is a bit more robust for Western European languages because it doesn't move the letters as drastically, but it is still heavily optimized for English. There are actually specific variants like Colemak DH which are designed to be even more ergonomic on certain types of keyboards. The rabbit hole goes very, very deep. You can spend months just researching the different variations of these layouts before you even press a single key.
That sounds like something you would do, Herman. You would spend 3 months researching the perfect layout, and then never actually get around to learning it.
Hey, I resemble that remark. But in all seriousness, the research is part of the fun for people like us. It is about understanding the systems we use every day. Even if Daniel never hits 100 words per minute in Colemak, the process of learning it will make him much more aware of how he interacts with his computer. It breaks that mindless habit of QWERTY and makes the act of typing a conscious, intentional choice.
I like that. It is about intentionality. We talk a lot on this show about how to be more intentional with technology, whether it is how we use AI or how we set up our physical desks. Taking control of the interface is a powerful thing. It is a way of saying, I am not just going to accept the defaults that were handed to me by a 19th century manufacturer.
It really is. And Daniel, if you are listening, I think the fact that you are already at 100 words per minute means you have a high level of finger dexterity and coordination. That is going to make the transition both easier and harder. Easier because your fingers already know how to move quickly, but harder because the frustration of being slow will be much more acute for you. You are used to being a Ferrari, and suddenly you are going to feel like a tricycle for a few weeks.
But a tricycle that eventually becomes a supersonic jet.
That is the dream, anyway. I think the key takeaway for Daniel, and for anyone else considering this, is that it is not an all-or-nothing proposition. You can be a dual layout typist. You can keep your QWERTY skills for the laptop and your Colemak skills for the home office. It is a way to protect your body while still being able to function in the wider world.
And if you are worried about the science, just look at your own hands. If you feel tension, if you feel that dull ache at the end of a long day of typing, that is all the evidence you really need. Our tools should serve us, not the other way around. If a 19th century layout is causing you pain in the 21st century, it is time for an upgrade.
Well said, Korn. And honestly, even if voice technology does take over in 20 years, that is 20 years of health you have preserved. That is 20 years of more comfortable, more fluid work. That seems like a pretty good return on investment for a few weeks of frustration.
I agree. I think Daniel has the right idea. He is looking at the long game, and with a young son like Ezra around, he is going to want his hands to be in good shape for years to come. Whether it is for typing, for coding, or for playing catch in a few years, hand health is a long-term asset.
And speaking of assets, we should probably mention that if you want to dive deeper into the science of how we sit and work, episode 603 on the science of perfect desk height is a great companion to this discussion. It is all part of the same ergonomic puzzle.
Definitely. Well, this has been a fascinating dive into something we usually don't even think about. Daniel, thank you for sending that prompt in. It is a great reminder that even the most basic things, like the order of letters on a keyboard, are worth questioning.
It really is. I'm going to go check on that soup now. I think I heard a container hitting the porch. My mother's vegetable soup is the one thing that can pull me away from a keyboard discussion.
Save some for me. And hey, to all our listeners, if you've been enjoying my weird prompts, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It genuinely helps the show reach more people who are interested in these kinds of deep dives into the intersection of technology and humanity.
Yeah, it really does make a difference. You can find us at myweirdprompts.com, where we have our full archive and a contact form if you want to send us your own prompt. You can also email us at show@myweirdprompts.com. We love hearing from you.
And don't forget, our show music is generated with Suno. It is amazing what you can do with these generative tools these days to create a specific vibe for a show.
It really is. All right, I think that is a wrap for today. I've got a dentist to call and some soup to eat.
Thanks for listening to My Weird Prompts. I am Korn.
And I am Herman Poppleberry. We will see you next time.
Goodbye, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts.